Greetings, this is Dr. John Tillman. This is a online video lecture for the class History 104-05 and -06. This week we'll be covering colonialism in Africa. This lecture is specifically focused on colonialism and the impact it had in the area known as Central Africa. The year takes place from 1880 to 1914. Throughout this short 15-minute video lecture, we will understand the motives behind colonialism of Africa, what impact did colonialism have on the continent of Africa itself, and how the global society respond to colonialism in Africa. Here you have particular pictures of a man being carried around by Africans subject to colonialism in Angola. This picture right here is King Leopold II of Belgium. This picture right here is a picture of Otto Benga, an African who is from Central Africa, or known as the Belgian Congo. He's very important in the audio visual you'll be watching this week. And this is a picture of boys in Central Africa who have no hands. We'll go into the reason why that later. First thing first, what we have to do is, here's a picture of what Central Africa was. This area today is known as the Democratic Republic of the Congo. This area at that time was colonized by Belgium. Here you see Gabon, the Congo Republic, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Tanzania, Uganda, Angola. Now we have to get into, so this is the area that we're covering. Now let's really ask the questions. What are the motives behind colonizing Africa? It wasn't just the continent of Africa being colonized. You had U.S. imperialism in Latin America. You also had colonization in parts of India and the Middle East. And of course, imperialism in parts of Asia. But African colonization is very much unique to all the other areas. Three motives I want you to understand the reason why. One is economic, access to natural resources for global industry. What we're looking at here is that after the African slave trade, the global society has now created what's called global capitalism. And now what you're seeing is that industrialization is now taking place in Europe and the United States, and they're looking for resources. So where will they find those resources? They'll find them in Africa. And now it's about many countries in Western Europe, Germany, Great Britain, France, well, the Germanic states and the Italian states are now fighting over resources in those particular areas of in the African continent. Those resources we'll get into a little later. There's cultural motive, and this is the use of white missionaries, right? And what I mean by this is this, that colonization is the use of violence. Most Europeans will use violence to actually conduct colonization. But then there's a passive violence, or a non-violent way of subjugating the people. When I talk about Christianizing and civilizing Africans, what I'm talking about is people will use excuses that what white missionaries are doing is a humanitarian service to Africans, quote, to win their souls to Christianity, to lead them into heaven. Well, here's the thing. There's an old saying, when white missionaries came to the continent of Africa, the Africans had all the gold and the missionaries had the Bibles. And within a year's time, the missionaries had all the gold and the Africans had the Bibles. What that metaphor pretty much means is that you're going to see Christianity being used inappropriately to subjugate a group of people to gain access to resources. In order for European nations to gain access into countries, they will use missionaries to do so. And then there's political motives, control of land, trade, and the people who live within the continent. Those are the motives for colonization. So when you look at the natural resources, There are specifically in Central Africa. You see tusk right here, ivory that comes from Africans. You see cobalt, which is very important for our cell phones, computers, to this very day. The majority of our natural resources are coming out of the continent of Africa. This white substance, this white cloudy substance right here is called rubber. The rubber is coming out of trees used to make bicycles and everything else, right? Rubber, tires, bicycle tires, etc. Now, how is it that people were actually able to get into the continent of Africa? Well, it was through missionary work. Here is Dr. David Livingstone. He was one of the first missionaries to get a foothold in Central Africa. And he traveled through what's called the Zambia River, called Victoria Falls in 1855. And because he took that gateway, the Zambia River became, because he took that river, the Zambia River became the gateway of European penetration and colonization in Africa. Meaning this, in a country known as Belgium, you had King Leopold, who was looking for ways to get into the continent of Africa and exploit the resources and exploit the people themselves. This became the route that many Europeans would use to get into Central Africa. That's what made David Livingstone so very important. Now, of course, I use this term because this is colonization, right? This is missionaries. And again, what you talk about brainwashing African children right here is this, is that they're taught to view that their African history, their African language, their African culture and religions are quote unquote subhuman, and quote unquote you're taught to be that immoral, and that a European version way of language, a European version way of culture, a European version way of family and politics is the appropriate way. What you're really doing is that they're castigating that the African civilization is subhuman, it's not cultural. You begin to see terms such as savagery. This is things that are saying, and that if only they will adopt a European style, that they'll be more civilized, but yet they're still racially inferior. These are excuses that they're using to sit there and say that Africans are inferior, and they're trying to justify their colonization. So what you're seeing here is white missionaries and educationists who are working hand in hand with European nations to subjugate and colonize Africans and to gain access to resources. Another person is Henry Morton Stanley. Henry Morton Stanley is the person who goes in to travel into the Congo. He's paid there by King Leopold II. Now, what you have here is what's called the Berlin Conference. This is very important because these European nations had come together and they create rules of how European nations will occupy the African continent. And they use a language called African cake, land, resources, and the people itself. And it's initiated by Otto von Bismarck of the German states and King Leopold of Belgium. And what they're doing is that they're trying to avoid war with each other. So what they do is that they actually begin to, this Berlin Conference is very significant because you begin to see European nations carve up African nations for colonization. Now, by saying this, there are no Africans or Asians or Latin Americans invited to the partition of Africa. They're not invited at all. And here you see a great map. You see France, England, Germany, Spain, Portugal, Italy, and Belgium. And this is the color-coded map of what they own. So this is what you call this African cake. And now the partition of Africa is the cutting of the cake. This is a cartoon of King Belgium because he's leading the efforts. Now, the Gatling gun and quinine, understand something. This Gatling gun, they had very difficulty going into Africa and trying to conquer the nation of Africa itself. So what they would use is that they would use quinine to fight off infectious diseases such as malaria. Then they'll use the Gatling gun to actually shoot down and gun down Africans. Before then, the Europeans were actually losing. And then it became very violent. You had something called pacification and hammering. They really started to kill Africans and sever their heads. Then you have King Leopold. And here's a man who would actually colonize the Congo Free State for profit and national prestige. 3 reasons why. He wanted to acquire the rubber to build an international bicycle and car industry. And he would actually colonize the continent of Africa and use the rubber itself to get it. Now, this man was brought up on charges in an international court of justice for atrocities. He was never convicted. As a matter of fact, the evidence was burned and hidden. Why? Because European nations would have to be held accountable for colonization. This is very important in itself because what was going on within the Congo was really former acts of slavery and form of just downright persecution of Africans. This is Leon Fissetz. He's the commissioner of the Free State of the Congo. This right here is the rubber. What you really begin to see is the idea of Africans who are coming together, the Africans who are being colonized by the Belgian Congo. You are forced into forced labor. You're forced to work long hours, and you're forced to work hours in towards the rubber trees, and you're working long hours. Now, if you do not get the rubber out the trees fast enough, you'll be usually be punished by the cutting off of the hands or body parts. They'll actually take burnt up coal and pour it onto your heads. They will also begin to burn down your villages. You also will actually whip with a sheet cut, which is a whip made of rhinoceros hide that will take off your skin. And you also understand this: when you actually suck the rubber out of the trees, you have to pour it on towards your skin in order to salvage the rubber. And what the men would do, they would actually take razor blades and start peeling off the rubber onto your skins. So these were the atrocities that were going on within the Belgian Congo. You had over 11 million people had lost their lives. What this actually says is that colonization was never for the betterment or the civilizing or the Christianizing of African people. This is actually the economic and racial exploitation of African people here. And of course, this is red rubber and punishment. Of course, these are men. These pictures right here are children who had their hands cut off. That's a picture of the sheet cut. Right here is a picture of the men or the soldiers who were commissioned by the white colonizers to go and cut off the hands of people and bring back the hands as souvenirs for those who were not getting the rubber out the trees fast enough or being disobedient. This is Edmund Murrow, who was the author of Red Rubber book and a newspaper called the West African Mail. And what you begin to see here is advocacy journalism against King Leopold and the Congo Free State. This is important because it actually led to an investigation among the International Court of Justice. But his work would be ignored, and of course, Belgium would get, of course, King Leopold would be free. He would not be indicted. As a matter of fact, he sells the Congo Free State. He sells the Congo Free State to Belgium, and Belgium now controls it. And because since Belgium had to do so, Belgium, the country of Belgium, now had to rewrite the entire history of colonialism. This right here is very important because you begin to see this pop culture that's being created, racist cartoons. To understand the racial ideology of this time period, social Darwinism, a racial caste ideology with white Anglo-Saxon on the top and African on the bottom. What they're trying to say, they believe in an ideology that says that it is justifiable to colonize Africans. And what they're saying is they're using it as an ideology as to sit here and say that Africans are inferior, Africans need colonization for their betterment. And what you begin to see here is a justification of all of this. This is the last slide. I'm coming upon 10 seconds. This is the end of this slide and the end of this lecture. Any more questions you have for me, we can clear it up in the virtual classroom. Thank you.